Hi everyone, I'm Jennifer Morrison. I'm a colored pencil artist who specializes in botanical artwork, and today I'm going to show you how I drew this festive drawing of amaryllis flowers and pine needles using Prismacolor colored pencils. For this drawing, I am working with a reference that I created by combining two images. Because I work in photorealism, having a great reference image is a big part of my process. An important decision that you're going to need to make is which supplies to use. Today I'm drawing on Rising Museum mountboard with Prismacolor Premier Pencils. I have been using these pencils for many years now, and there's so many things to love about them. The large set of Prismacolors has many vibrant colors. These pencils are soft and creamy and blend beautifully. I am blending the pencil with Odorless paint thinner. This is an optional step, but it really helps to remove any graininess from your drawing and create a painterly look to your finished piece. You will find a complete supply list attached to this project. Up next, you're going to need to create an outline. There are many different ways to do this, but I like to trace my outline in order to ensure that everything is perfect. You can use tracing paper, a light box, or simply tape your paper to your computer screen or TV and trace from there. You can also print the outline that I have provided and color it in like a coloring page. Whatever you need to do to get started is fine. All right, now that you have your reference image, outline, and supplies, you are ready to start the drawing, and here we go. Working first on the flowers, I'm going to start by outlining a single petal. I used a combination of Crimson Lake and Raspberry. You can't always outline the edges of a flower petal, but in this reference, the edges are very pronounced, which makes this easy. Next, you're going to start drawing in the veins of the petal using one of your red pencils. I used Crimson Red, Crimson Lake, Permanent Red, or Raspberry, depending on the colors I could see in the reference. Use a light hand until you're confident that you have the placement correct. It's important to have these lines emphasize the shape of the petal to give a 3D appearance, so you want to make sure they are going in the right direction. Use your reference and your line drawing as a guide. Notice that some of these lines are not solid. You can use light dots and dashes in place of a solid line. This will make your drawing look more realistic. Completely fill in the patterning on the petal with solid red where it is needed. Once again, I was looking to my reference image to help me decide which colors to choose. I used lots of the Crimson Lake and Crimson Red here, and even added in some poppy red to warm things up as needed. Use your white pencil to add a layer of pigment all over the lighter portions of the petal. Then go over this with cream to warm it up. You can add a second or third layer of cream in areas of shadow. You can also add some pale sage where you see a green tint on the petals. Next, add a bit of green around the base of the petals. I used a combination of olive green and apple green around the lower portion of the base, and I used chartreuse to blend up into the petal for a natural look. Do your best to transition these colors by overlapping light layers of cream, white, and chartreuse. Next, I like to blend with solvent. I start by dipping my paintbrush into the solvent and then blotting it on a cloth to remove any excess. You don't need a lot of solvent on your brush. The goal is to dissolve the pencil pigment so that you can remove any graininess. I started with the red areas of the petal, then cleaned my brush off with the solvent before I blended the white and the cream. You have to be careful or you will drag the red pigment onto the white of the petal. If this is the first time you've used solvent with colored pencils, I would recommend that you practice on a separate piece of paper before you try this on your drawing. I like to let the solvent dry for at least 15 minutes or longer before I come back over with my next layers of colored pencil. After the solvent has dried, I will go back over each area of the petal. I'm going to be brightening any colors, making any color adjustments, sharpening things up, cleaning up the edges, adding details. As an optional step, you can use an electric eraser to pull up bits of color and add texture to your petals. This is when I'm going to be looking back and forth between my drawing and my reference, asking questions like, is this close? I'm going to want to make any adjustments needed at this point and then move on to the next petal. You can always come back and add details after you have drawn the rest of the flower. And when everything looks good, I'm going to move on to the next petal and start the process all over again. Moving on to the pine cones, I started by blocking in the light areas using Prismacolor Peach Beige. I used a sharpened peach beige and sometimes white to indent some details into the darker areas of the pine cones. When you go over these areas with the dark browns, the pigment will skim over the top, leaving you with some really nice sharp details. For the darker areas of the pine cone, I was using dark umber in the very darkest areas, and then a combination of dark brown and light umber for the lighter brown areas. You can use different shades of these browns to create separation between the scales of the pine cone, and this will also help add definition and depth. Now I'm going to carefully blend over the pine cones with the solvent. I'm going to avoid dragging any of the dark brown pigment over the light areas and then let it dry before coming back through with my second layers of pencil. Then I'm going to go back over each area to sharpen details, darken the shadows, and brighten the highlights. I used a cold gray 90% in the very darkest areas to make sure I had a really nice dark deep shadow. And you're going to want to make sure you have very sharp edges around each of the scales to give them definition. Now I'm ready to start working on the pine needles. I started drawing these using a very sharp olive green pencil, and here is a tip. I sharpened my pencils constantly while I was working on these pine needles. You want to make sure that these stay really nice and crisp. This is where having an electric pencil sharpener really comes in handy. And you really want to have fun with this part. I didn't try to follow the reference image too closely here. I just drew some straight lines and some curvy lines. I overlapped them and added gray to darken them and pale sage to lighten them. I spent about 3 hours on this section, so just keep drawing and overlapping until this looks good. After I had a base of the olive green, I overlapped these with several pale sage pine needles. The pale sage works really well here because these needles appear to be in the background of the drawing, and it really helps give depth and dimension to this drawing overall. Then I just repeated this process on the rest of the pine needles on the rest of the drawing. And for the section of pine needles in the lower right hand corner, I added some cool gray 90% around the pine cone to make the pine needles appear to be more dense in this area and less wispy the way they are in the upper area of the drawing. And once again, here is my final drawing. I hope you were able to follow along and feel inspired to get yourself some colored pencils and give this a try. Thanks for watching, everybody.